Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. So today I want to keep going with my Dead in the 2020 series. And if you haven't watched part one, you probably should, where I explain some of the disclaimers of this series and I kind of put a reminder that these are just opinions on the topic of debt and that my views are very contrarian on debt. They're very contrarian, although they're my views and I believe in them, but they're very contrarian, and so it's not for everyone. This series is not for everyone. Um, but anyways, let me get started with the series. So, episode two in the series is: Does debt always make you fragile? And so let's begin by talking briefly about the arguments against debt. There's very strong arguments against taking any debt. Dave Ramsey in the financial YouTube world is the number one on that, and he says, "Oh, it's just dumb. It's not common sense. It's against religion." There's so many reasons why you don't want to get in debt because of that. That's the Dave Ramsey argument. Then you kind of have a more traditional middle class view of debt, and that is, oh, you have to pay interest, right? Interest is bad. Um, Interest is expensive, right? That's the common average, average person's view of debt. Debt is expensive. Debt is bad. Conventional wisdom. It's almost conventional wisdom that, okay, well, debt for a mortgage or for a car, that's okay. But debt, let's say, would be called quote unquote high debt, say at 10% plus, is not okay. That's the conventional wisdom. That's kind of like I said, the middle class type thinking is entirely against debt that is very high interest, but in general, pretty much okay with some level of debt. And when people say, "Oh, 10% plus is just dumb," again, what's the real inflation rate? What is the real inflation rate? I believe it is 15% monetary inflation, and it all depends on your own assessment. And you have to like kind of figure it out for yourself. What is the true inflation rate to you, in your opinion? Are your tastes and your preferences going up 30% a year in cost? Right? That's that's another point that again I think most common sense doesn't take into account, is the fact that nominal interest rate is not a real interest rate. And so as long as your nominal rate does not exceed the real rate, uh, you could argue that debt is very very cheap, or even you could argue that one is paying you to take debt. So be very careful with that argument, because that number, when people say, oh, when people qualify high interest rate, well, that number should fluctuate, and it should fluctuate with the current monetary environment and with the current monetary inflation. But anyways, that's a generally accepted argument, and that argument I mostly agree with that argument, except in special circumstances. I mostly agree with that argument. Um, and then if you think like an economist, or actually like someone who thinks more deeply about this, or at least is like interested in it, which I think I am, is the argument of fragility. So to me, the most compelling argument against debt is that of fragility. Debt makes you fragile. When there is a crisis and you have a lot of debt, you go bankrupt. That is the whole idea behind debt, right? In '08, when GM, right, had so much debt, they should have gone bankrupt and not been brought back from the ashes. That's that's true fragility. When you learn about fragility, when you go bankrupt, you don't go back into debt. So the big argument against taking debt is the fact that fragility still exists. And one of the big questions as to why I named this series Debt in the 2020s is the question that I ask, is that, does debt always make you fragile? Is debt is debt always something that makes you fragile? And I believe we're seeing a shift in that. We're seeing a big shift in that, and I hope to talk a little bit about this shift that we're seeing for the average person, for the average consumer. I think we're seeing a great shift in which having a bunch of debt may, under certain circumstances, not make you fragile, which I think is very, very, very interesting, and it's very dangerous because um, humans are creatures that learn, and if that doesn't make you fragile, then there's going to be a lot of moral hazard, and you're going to be like, okay, well, let me get into debt. There's no consequences. There's no consequences associated with debt, and so let's just play dumb a little bit here and assume the conventional wisdom on fragility about debt. So what would it be? Well, if you lose your job and you have debt, you risk being wiped out, right? You risk losing your home, for example, because you have a bunch of debt, your personal home. Now, we know it's very often off to creditors. Creditors often can't get to that. So that's something that we need to discuss. If you borrow money for a college degree and you don't get a good job, you'll be saddled with monthly payments that will weigh you down. Now, there hasn't been a payment on student loans since March of 2020, and I happen to believe student loans are not resuming for perhaps a decade. Student loan payments. That's what I believe. I believe it's going to be like DACA. So again, where's the fragility argument against student loan debt? Is there a fragility argument? They're paused. If a payment is paused for 10 years with no new interest accruing, I mean, that is insane. You're removing the fragility of the debt. Let me move on. If you buy volatile stock on margin, you may get wiped out. Well, that's still largely true, but we'll talk a little bit about that and try to think in depth about special situations where it may not be true. You get medical debt. If you don't pay, it makes you fragile. Actually, this is a very interesting one that I don't follow Dave Ramsey much, aside for entertainment. I think it's entertaining. But if you follow Dave Ramsey, you know full well that medical debt, although it makes you fragile, it's not as straightforward as you'd think. Okay, move on. If you overload on credit cards, you will be stuck in an expensive loop of payments, as there is no program to refinance. And we know full well there's things. And remember, all of these aspects of fragility of debt have a big law component, and the law changes all the time. And so the question really of the next few videos that I make in the series is that does this debt, whatever debt you think, does it still make you as fragile? Does it really make you fragile? Okay. Is there an exogenous crisis somewhere and you can't pay your mortgage? And if you can't pay your mortgage, you lose your home. Is there that somewhere? Right? And we obviously know that that's not entirely true. Evictions have not come, are having a very, very hard time to come back. So we know it's entirely true. So again, fragility has to go into your assessment. And then this sarcasm, if you die with debt, debt passes on to your heirs, and you have to wait for the next jubilee 50 years from now. And that's how it used to be in ancient times. And I just put this in there for us to realize that the argument of fragility that comes attached to debt is getting harder and harder to make. And so when you have this happen, you have, I think, a lot of issues that happen into the economy. And really, when you get debt, you need to ask yourself, will this debt make me more fragile? And I hope to really unpack this argument because debt still theoretically and practically, I believe right now makes you fragile. But there are some instances, like the student loan instance, where fragility and debt do not go hand in hand. And that's a big shift. That is a big shift in personal finance. And that is a big shift as to how people think about debt. So again, this is the topic of the series. Many more videos in the series, but the next few videos I'll make about this topic. And we're going to try to find out which debts still make you very fragile and you have to be very, very careful, and which other debts, I believe, are more okay than others because they do not, in case a crisis happens, they do not make you they do not make you as much as risk as what one would think or as what conventional wisdom have you think. So again, this is not credit advice, borrowing advice, loan advice, any type of advice. This is just entertainment. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. And follow me on Twitter at @BeatVetDenominator. Thank you so much and have a great day.